welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with two JFK assassination researchers who have been on to discuss a certain particular theory or subject in the assassination. And we talked about LBJ first time you guys were together. Now we're here to talk about Roscoe White. Mostly it's a story I've never really fully dived into. It's a little kind of added on measures of certain details that give weight to more instances and areas of the assassination, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on the Roscoe White story after you guys introduce yourselves. Tim, do you mind introducing yourself, and then Barry will have you go next?
Yeah, my name is Tim Brennan. I'm a researcher into various events that have happened in country's histories, like the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy Jr., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've written 5 books with my co-authors, and there currently are 4 DVDs to accompany 4 of those books. We're working on the 5th DVD. All of that is available at our website or on Amazon. Our website is www.thejfkassassination.com.
Yeah, my name is Barry Jones, and I've been a high school history teacher for about 26, 27 years. I got into the JFK assassination research field sort of as a mistake. I was primarily interested in the Watergate scandal, but that led me back to 63 and the JFK assassination. I've been researching it ever since. I've written 5 books, 3 of which are about the JFK assassination, and I currently offer homeschool curriculum, history, U.S. history, world history, government, and also an elective on the JFK assassination on my website, www.sphistory.com.
I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the Roscoe White incident. When you guys came across the Roscoe White story, maybe one of you, either Barry or Tim, can give a background on Roscoe White and I guess his involvement or name that appears in the JFK assassination.
Well, I'll just start off with the earliest known association between Roscoe White and Lee Harvey Oswald was the fact that they both served in the Marines together in Japan. And they were researching photographs that had been taken by the U-2 spy planes that were flying over Russia. So they were both photographic experts, and they worked together. And it is my personal opinion that since 1960, Roscoe White was being groomed to be the assassin of John F. Kennedy, and Lee Harvey Oswald was being groomed all along to be the patsy. Most people may not know that they both were actually, in fact, employed by the CIA.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Tim started there, there's just an amazing set of circumstances where these two are tied together. Beginning in 1957, when Roscoe White starts serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. And of course, Oswald served in the Marine Corps from 56 to 59. Roscoe White served from 57 to 61. But that wasn't all. They were also in the exact same military division, which was the 1st Marine Air Wing. They traveled to the Far East in 1957 on the exact same ship. They were both stationed at Atsugi and in Japan at the same time, and they both worked on the U-2 project while stationed at Atsugi. And so there's just an amazing, to have no connection, that's seemingly a set of amazing circumstances, which I don't believe. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. But the story itself, if you want me to get into the story, Robbie, and how this came to light, it actually happened, and it's a result of a discovery by his son after his death. But just to kind of go back to the day of the assassination, Roscoe White, 1 month prior to the assassination, had just gotten a job with the Dallas Police Department. And on the day of the assassination, he was assigned to the Identification Bureau, the DPD, and as such, had access to any photograph. Tim mentioned their photographic experience, and and both of them had extensive photographic experience. So his job with the Dallas Police Department on the day of the assassination gave him access to any of the evidence that came out as a result of photographs. And they find after his death in a footlocker a bunch of photographs, which were really interesting. One of the photographs was of Jack Ruby and Geneva White. Turns out Jack Ruby had employed Geneva White at the county club. She wasn't a showgirl. She was a cigarette girl or a hostess. And there's a picture of them posing together. So obviously Roscoe White and his wife Geneva knew Jack Ruby. There's also a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald posing in the backyard. Turns out Roscoe White had access to the only backyard photo made from the original negative. After the assassination, the original negatives of that famous backyard photo disappeared, and all the rest of the backyard photos that we've seen since are not made from the original. But Roscoe White's photo in his footlocker was from the original negative, which speaks to access. There was a photograph of Roscoe White in his uniform. There was a photo of J.D. Tippit in civilian clothes, which indicates a relationship with J.D. Tippit. There was a photograph of Oswald, his mugshot after his arrest. There was a photo of Jack Ruby's mugshot after his arrest. There was a photo, and boy, if I could get my hands on this photo, it's a photo of J.D. Tippit, Jack Ruby, and Oswald together. I would love to be able to get my hands on that photo. And then some other random photos, Oswald in his Marine uniform, Oswald's Social Security card, a photo of Oswald's children, a photo of Oswald's military ID, and a photo of Oswald's Fair Play for Cuba membership card. So clearly, these photographs indicate a couple things, a couple relationships. Obviously, Ruby and Roscoe knew each other. Obviously, Ruby and Geneva, his wife, knew each other since he employed her. Obviously, there is a relationship between Roscoe and Oswald that dates back to 56, 57 and their time in the Marine Corps together. But the fact that all those Oswald photos, including photos of his children, backyard photo from the original negatives, indicates some sort of relationship between Roscoe and Oswald. And then also the photo of all three of them together indicates a relationship between Ruby and Oswald and Tippit. And boy, that's a big nugget of information. So, because the Warren Commission is going to come out and say none of these people knew each other. Ruby didn't know Oswald. Oswald didn't know Ruby, and none of them had any knowledge or connections to Tippit, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all discovered after his death in a footlocker by his son Ricky, who then goes public with it. Of course, that didn't happen until 71. So the assassination was at 63. So for 8 years, we don't really know anything about Roscoe White. And all of a sudden in 71, when Ricky finds his footlocker, that led to that discovery. I just looked, there's a series of other discoveries that come out of that paint a picture, just like Tim said, that Roscoe was the shooter on the grassy knoll. Which, of course, we'll get to that part of the story later. But
yeah, I think I just wanted to add a couple things about the information Ricky found in his father's in that canister in the basement of the family home. One of them was a list of people that Roscoe had killed, admitted to killing, some 27 people worldwide, including Kennedy. And these other people were killed after the assassination. And in a couple of the pictures, Roscoe had made remarks. There was a picture of the picket fence, and he put an X where he was standing behind the picket fence. There was a picture of Jack Ruby. And I don't know what the circumstances were with the picture of Ruby, but it was marked. He had remarked, Ruby was brave, set up. And there is definitely a Venn diagram that it just brings all these people together I was in Dallas this weekend talking to a lot of people, Robert Groden, some other really good researchers. And, when you start putting names like Oswald, Ruby, Roscoe White, Tippit, LBJ, and then all the other interest groups in and around the assassination, whether it had anything to do with it or witnesses, it's a big Venn diagram. And in the middle of it's LBJ, and close next to that are Roscoe White, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Jack Ruby.
I want to ask, you mentioned, Tim, about grooming Roscoe White to be Patsy or set up Oswald. Do you mind explaining why you think that and where you might have gotten information on about that?
Well, first of all, as I said in the beginning, Oswald was a CIA employee from the very beginning, and so was Roscoe. They were both being controlled by the CIA. They were also both being monitored very closely by the FBI from the early 60s, as early as 1960, maybe even more. Oswald's mother, Marguerite, had receipts of his payroll from the CIA. Oswald was also an FBI informant. And the fact that both these guys were CIA puppets for perhaps right up to the time of the assassination, who really knows? They characterized Roscoe White as being ex-CIA. And that's true because, I think it was actually 2 weeks or so before the assassination, he joined the Dallas police force as a photographic expert. And he did that under orders from the OSI. And there is a memo in our book that proves that he was ordered to Dallas. And he was ordered to kill President Kennedy by the CIA with the help of the Dallas Police Department. The night before the assassination, he supposedly told his wife that he was going to kill the president. And she looked at him, of course, shocked, and said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if I don't kill him, they're going to kill you and me and our 2 boys." He was a soldier. And that's how Ricky came to ultimately just acknowledge the fact that his dad had, in fact, killed John F. Kennedy. And he was a soldier acting on orders, nothing more.
Robbie, when he opened that footlocker after his dad's death, he found some pretty amazing things. He found a diary, number one, with a confession from his dad in his dad's handwriting. And of course, that diary has been lost to history. Many people suspect that the FBI took it, but he read that passage because it was just a diary of day by day. And on November 22nd, 1963, his dad noted in that diary some pretty specific confessions. And of course, this was a huge thing for Ricky to find. And he went to his mom and confronted her, and she admitted it was true. And together they read it and reread it, read it and reread it. So even after the diary disappeared, Ricky can recite by memory exactly that confession that his dad wrote in the diary. But to Tim's point about the connections that Roscoe had to naval intelligence, also in that footlocker were 3 cables that he had preserved in protective plastic. So they had they were inserted into this plastic. And of course, over the time of 8 years, they'd still yellowed with age and things of that nature. But those 3 cables, there were 3 of them. One of them was dated February 1963. And the cable, and he saved these to prove who he was and who he was working for. The cable was from Navy Intelligence. It said so right at the top, from Navy Intelligence. And underneath that, it had Roscoe White's military serial number. And it was addressed to, quote, Mandarin. Mandarin was Roscoe White's ONI code name, Mandarin. And underneath the code name, it had subject, quote, and this is a direct quote, "Foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood." And it was signed by a C. Bowers from OSHA, which is not OSHA like we know it today. It was the Office of Special Handling Affairs at that time. And at the bottom of the cable, it read, and this is important because it's on all three of the cables exactly the same, regarding, rifle code AAA destroy. Now, we didn't know at the time, we didn't find out to the mid-70s, that the CIA had an assassination program called ZR Rifle. And the distinguishing characteristic of ZR Rifle was that it was intended to assassinate a U.S. target on U.S. soil. They simultaneously had an assassination program called Executive Action. That was to assassinate foreign heads of state. ZR Rifle was domestic. And this is a part of ZR Rifle, this cable from in February of 63 to their agent, Mandarin. And the next cable is September of 1963. So we're getting closer to the assassination. And this goes to what Tim just said. It has the same exact heading as the February cable, but the subject has changed. The subject says, quote, Dallas destination has been chosen. Your place hidden within the department. Contacts are within this letter. Continue on as planned. I think two things stand out about that subject. One is that Dallas is going to be the location. And the second is that your place is hidden within the department. Because what happens next in October, he gets a job in Dallas Police Department. It's the same time Lee Harvey Oswald gets a job at the Texas School Book Depository. Now, to this day, there is no application. Roscoe White's application with the city of Dallas is not in his personnel file. There's no record of him being hired, but he got in the month before the assassination. That cable has the same exact footnote regarding rifle that the original cable had. And the last cable is December of 1963. So this is right after the assassination. It has the same heading. The subject this time says, quote, stay within the department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do of the mix-up. The men will be in to cover all misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned. Wait for further orders. And again, it has the same RE rifle footnote as the previous two cables. So him saving those three cables established pretty firmly a couple things, as Tim indicated. Number one, he was Mandarin, and he will identify himself as Mandarin in his confession. This is how we know who they're speaking to. In his confession, this is the original confession that they found in the footlocker, and it's dated 11/22/63. And he's specific. He says, quote, codename Lebanon was in the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Codename Saul was in the records building, and codename Mandarin was behind the stockade fence. Shots fired from upper buildings were for diversion. Shots fired, target hit. Shots from fence, definite hit. Man on other side of fence in the way. Shots again from upper buildings, no hit. Target open, fired, definite hit. Gun retrieved by man to the side, took to the rail car area. Whirled over fence, took man down to protect myself. Ran around back of fence, down embankment to the car. Drove to Oak Cliff, met officer, told officer not to drive by house. Something was wrong. Forced to take out officer at 10th and Patton. That's Tippett. Backtracked to car, drove back to the area to take out other passengers. And this is a very significant little throw in here that might not mean anything to you if you don't know anything about ZR1 and the recent book by Mary Haverstick. He says, quote, failed to transport subject to Redbird, realized what a mistake I had made. Back to DPD, waiting information. That confession is loaded. It tells you who shot Kennedy. He did, Mandarin, from behind the stockade fence. He said it was a definite hit. It tells you who took his gun after he shot, which totally corroborates or is corroborated by what Ed Hoffman saw and what Lee Bowers saw. They saw two people behind the fence, one handing the gun to the other. It also tells who killed J.D. Tippit. It says he did. He went to Oak Cliff. Something was wrong, quote, forced to take out officer at 10th and Patton. And then it talks about Redbird Airfield. I don't know anybody else who's talked about Redbird Airfield other than Mary Haverstick with respect to QJ Wynn and the ZR rifle.
Larry Hancock and David Boylan do a presentation for Dealey Plaza UK, and they're doing what the Lancer conference about the Redbird Airfield. But to go back on one of the things you mentioned, when he was stopped or handing a gun off at whatever at near the knoll or behind the picket fence area, did he happen to shoot anybody? You mentioned a quote. It sounded like he shot somebody, not JFK, but did he happen to come across somebody that might have stopped him? And he,
yeah, because it says I've wondered that myself because it says that whirled over the fence, took me down to protect myself. Is that what you're referring to?
yeah, you said took man out to protect myself, but you know that would then qualify for the other kind of anomaly in the assassination, which is the pool of blood in Dealey Plaza. Now that pool of blood in Dealey Plaza, I've only been able to, I've wondered what that was. It was filmed by Jerry Coley, and I think Jim Hood took the photographs. I have the clips up on my YouTube channel, and Jerry Coley, when he's interviewed and asked about it, he said, yeah, FBI came over to me a couple days later, asked if I had these photographs. I told them, yeah, we got a pool of blood in Dealey Plaza. I got to ask you about it. And the FBI says, who else knows about this? And then he says, just Jim Hood, the guy who took the photographs. And they go, where's he at? And he goes, he's outside the door right there, listening in probably to our conversation. And then they go, bring him in here. Brings him in. They never see the photographs again. The guy said, forget what you just saw, or something along those lines. Now, I've linked that to Eddie Barker's statement. Eddie Barker was one of the first people to report that JFK was shot. It gets attributed to Walter Cronkite. That's not true. Just Walter Cronkite had the most viewership. So Eddie Barker's at the International Trade Mart. You can watch the video on YouTube. I have that clipped up as well, too. It's about 35 minutes long. He says three things. He says, I have two unconfirmed reports and one confirmed report. First report is JFK has been killed. That is unconfirmed. Two is Governor Connolly is in surgery. That is also unconfirmed. Three, and it is 100% confirmed report, there was a Secret Service agent that was killed in Dealey Plaza. Now, that would link up to the agent that would be up at the grassy knoll that was allegedly flashing a badge. Is it possible the Secret Service could have just eliminated the idea that there was an agent up there or erased him from the record because it looks bad on the Secret Service that if they had an agent die in the line of duty? Because then they're not the awesome FBI or Secret Service agents' desire to protect the president. That means that more shots could eventually lead on to being attacked on future presidents because they know that the security of the Secret Service is not up to par of what they've been propagandized to mean. That has been like a theory I've been kind of combating with, but it does go with that Roscoe White thing if you talk about that this guy saw a man and then defended himself, because then that would match the pool of blood. I mean, it would be a linkage there. But then that would also, would that be Mr. X that was brought in at Parkland Hospital that allegedly one of the reception nurses saw? I mean, there's a lot of weird things that start tying in together. And I don't know how that information leaked out or when that information leaked out. So to say that Roscoe White added that to his story, I can't really do because that, you know, I don't know when all that stuff. Jerry Coley, I'm pretty sure didn't come out until like the 90s.
Yeah, not sure, but I do want to add on to a few things that Barry suggested, and these are well, I'll get to the conjecture point. Many people believe that the badge man image that was taken of someone behind the picket fence, obviously wearing a Dallas Police Department uniform, was J.D. Tippit. It is a fact that Tippit and Roscoe were partners on the Dallas Police Force. That is a fact. Okay.
Well, briefly,
now, Gary,
right? Because he was only in the department for what, a month?
About a month, about 6 weeks, maybe.
It would match the people at the scene of the Tippit shooting that said they saw a person dressed up in a police officer's outfit. So,
well, and like Barry said earlier, Tippit started on the police force, and Oswald started at the school book depository on the same damn day. That's amazing.
You mean Roscoe White, not Tippett?
I mean Roscoe White. Yeah. So, so they're partners. Gary and I, my co-author Gary, who you know, we believe that it was Roscoe's job to go into the school book depository building and apprehend and or kill Oswald. Either way, he's a hero. And when he failed to do that, because Oswald wasn't in the sixth floor window, he was having lunch on the second floor cafeteria, corroborated by 6 witnesses. Okay, Oswald escaped. That made Tippett expendable, and that is why, and this dovetails what Barry was suggesting. Tippett had to go. He had to go because he knew too much. He was not a CIA employee. He was a longtime Dallas Police Department policeman, also with a very checkered past. And what galls me to this day is there is a sign up at 10th and Patton that it says this is where Lee Harvey Oswald killed Officer Tippett. What a joke. Now, there's also the report of 2 people running away from the scene at 10th and Patton. And the second person very much matches the description of Jack Ruby. And I could see that easily being the case because there were 2 different types of bullets taken from Tippett's body.
Well, Gavin McMahon's work has said that the whole Tippett shooting was a setup with planted witnesses and stuff of that sort. And the actual occurrence, what was supposed to happen, was actually about a street over. There was another instance where there was an issue that happened where an officer, I know it's called a traffic accident or something like that, that the officer that was with Tippett actually got called to. There's 2 cars that were in that area. But his work has explored that Jack Ruby was behind the whole Tippett thing, and the real target was Tippett. And I like I said, that's his work. I'm not going to try and I'll end up butchering it if I end up trying to talk about it. But there's a lot of fringe elements in the assassination. That the reason why I mentioned the Eddie Barker thing and the pool of blood stuff is because they're not talked about because they don't fit anywhere. And I think people aren't just making shit up. They saw something. So like a 6'8" man that's 200 and whatever something pounds with blonde hair carrying a rifle in Dealey Plaza is mentioned by 3 or 4 different people. I don't know where that went. It was never pursued because it wasn't an Oswald narrative thing. So I'm sure there's something somewhere in some theory or some idea or some account where that connects to something. Because I don't believe you add that to your memory or that just becomes something you created. I think you saw what you saw, but it's about, was it ever pursued or linked to anything? Now, I just linked 3 things to the Roscoe White thing. So there's about finding these little, whatever you would call anomalies and trying to see where they fit, because I do believe that there's a lot of things multifactorial that were going on with the assassination. That's why I was open to talking about Roscoe White. Now, you mentioned the backyard photograph stuff, the original negatives. There's 2 things I thought of when you said that. One, could he have got them through a relationship with Oswald based on their past military history that they had a connection, or do you think it was because he was on the Dallas police force he was able to withdraw that evidence? Because Oswald sent photos of himself allegedly with the backyard photographs, and I do believe he did this. I believe he sent them to multiple people because there's varying photographs. There's not just the one where he's holding the papers and the rifle. There's like 4 different editions of that one photo. So I believe that he took either 1 or 2 of those photos. I don't know if he took them all. But we all know in his official interrogation statement, when he was shown that photograph, I believe it was on the 2nd interrogation or the 3rd, he stated, that's my body, or that's me, but that's not my face. You guys superimpose that. You guys fake that. Now, he worked at a photo company. He would know if someone could do something like that. And I'm sure the technology was available to be able to do that. It's not like we're living in the fucking prehistoric days. So there's this, like I said, there's a lot of this that is more if you're really into the research and you really want to explore some things, that this should be an episode for you. But there's a lot of things that you can connect with the Roscoe White story. And I think that's why people are really quick to dismiss it, because it did come out later, and anything that usually came out later, like an account that came out 20 years later, or 30 years later, or 10 years later, it was just a no-go for a lot of researchers because they already invested in a certain area. So
That's key right there, what you're saying, Robbie. People get invested in their story. Uh, there's a third thing that was found in that locker. We've talked about two. We've talked about the confession and then the three cables, but there was a faded green scrapbook. It was actually a shorthand textbook that he had torn out some of the pages and then turned it around backwards and created a scrapbook working from the back to the front. And he had pasted into this scrapbook a series of items. Like for the very first item was the newspaper picture of the front page headline, quote, "The Moment the World Stood Still, November 22, 1963." And that's sort of the introduction to what this scrapbook is about. So as Ricky's looking through the scrapbook, he sees that Roscoe, in his own handwriting, has written above that headline, "The Moment the World Stood Still," these words, quote, "From Bay of Pigs to DL to NO." And what we've determined, or what researchers have determined, DL means Dallas and NO means New Orleans. And then on page 4, there is a picture of Carlos Marcello. And underneath the picture is the quote, and this is handwritten by Roscoe, quote, "Now get the head, going tail later." That is a reference to Carlos Marcello's quote, "A dog will continue to bite you if you cut off its tail. But if you cut off its head, the tail ceases to be a problem." And obviously that's a reference to Bobby Kennedy. On page 9, there's two pictures, seemingly out of the blue. One is a picture of Doris Duke, the actress, and another is a picture of her husband, Furio Rubiroso Ariza, who was an assassin for Rafael Trujillo down in Dominican Republic. And he had just died in June of 63 while in a meeting during a time where he was supposed to be meeting with the Chicago crime boss, Sam Giancana. And underneath this picture of Doris Duke and her husband is handwritten by Roscoe White, quote, "Cover up starts now." On page 15, there's a picture of Ruby shooting Oswald, and White has written a caption, quote, "Setup job. Ruby was brave." I think Tim mentioned that earlier. On page 17, there's a picture of DPD officer holding up the Oswald rifle, pretty famous picture. And White wrote underneath it a caption, quote, "7.65 German Mauser, our gun used to kill President Kennedy, November 26, 1963. 3 pages later, on page 20, there's a newspaper print of the Mary Mormon photograph with White's caption underneath, quote, "Mandarin kills K, uses 7.65 German Mauser in assassination." Also included, and Tim mentioned this, in the top left-hand corner was a red X and a dot marking the exact spot where he took the fatal shot. Of course, this is corroborated, I said earlier, by Ed Hoffman and Lee Bowers. And then on the back cover of this scrapbook, I'm throwing this one in for you, Robbie, because you mentioned this the last time we were on together. He says, quote, "28 people died from witness program. The rest of the people will later." And that indicates a CIA program to take out witnesses. At the time he wrote this, 28 people had already died, and he's saying more will come later. Underneath all of this is Roscoe Anthony White, full signature, and his military serial number. That was the third item that was discovered in this footlocker.
And what's ironic, Barry, about most of this information that you have talked about and I've touched on, nobody cares. None of this stuff has ever been widely released to the media. It just amazes me. It just amazes me. Because there is absolute proof of the fact that Roscoe White, in fact, killed Kennedy from the front of the fence, which throws everything that is contained within the Warren Commission right out the window. And it immediately holds up, quote unquote, esteemed American organizations like the FBI and the CIA and the Dallas police, and on and on and on. And that's why we're never going to hear if you think anything significant is going to come out of the rest of the stuff that they have sequestered so far, it's either also heavily redacted or completely gone. None of it's going to matter. None of it's going to matter. I also did want to touch on one thing you said about the photograph. You and Robbie were talking about it. There is a photograph of Roscoe White standing on a beach with a couple of guys. His posture is exactly the same as in that backyard photograph. His right hip is up and to the right a little bit. And he's got a crook in his wrist that from an injury when he was a kid. And it shows very clearly on the wrist of that photograph. It was his body and Oswald's head. And he was probably responsible for it. And when Oswald was shown the photograph after he was arrested, he was shown the photograph. And he said, "That isn't me. And if you give me enough time, I will prove it isn't me."
And that's when the negatives disappear. Robbie asked this question earlier. Where do you think he got the photo? I don't know. I could speculate, I suppose, but I think it's awful coincidental that all of this evidence disappears. The evidence that would have been, it would have helped Oswald. For example, the backyard photo. You go through that acoustic or that firm, that photographic company up in Canada went and looked at it and said it was a forgery. How about the shells that they said they found at 10th and Patton? They didn't have the officer's signature on the ones that were eventually included in the Warren Commission evidence. All kinds of evidence that was incriminating. The wallet that they said they found at the Tippett scene that had Alec Heidel and Lee Harvey Oswald IDs in it. When they were asked to produce it, they couldn't produce it because they realized you can't have a wallet at the scene of Tippett with two IDs, both to Lee Harvey Oswald, and then have him arrested 10 minutes later at the Texas Theater and pull out of his pocket another wallet. You can't have two wallets. So evidence like this starts disappearing. So I think it forms sort of a pattern. And when you say, well, he had access to the only negatives of the backyard photo, that to me says he had access to whoever manufactured or forged that photo and had the original negatives. And then when they realized it was going to be a problem because even Oswald didn't buy it, it disappears. And all the subsequent photos were copies or manufactured off of copies. Same thing with the wallet, same thing with the shell casings from 10th and Patton. You can go on and on and on to evidence that became inconvenient to the narrative disappeared or just went missing. And so those negatives of the backyard photo, I think, is more evidence on the side of the fact that those things were forged. Because I promise you, if they were not forged and they were legit, they'd be hidden away in the archives somewhere right now because it supported the narrative. So his access to that tells me that he had access to the people that were forging the stuff.
Now, that photo, like I said, there's multiple versions of it. There was, I do believe a couple of them were sent from Oswald. I do believe he was in the backyard taking photos with his rifle. But from the statements of the ones where it's like Hunter a fascist on the back, jokingly, doesn't bring any malicious intent. But it's something a kid in there who's 24 years old, like Oswald would do with a fucking gun. It just makes sense. You send it to people, especially groups that you're trying to associate with, not to sheep dip or anything like that, because it helps you get into that group. Like, look how cool. I think you sent one to Des Moines Shield. Des Moines Shield had a photograph that said something like that on the back of it, But there is a photo of the backyard, and Oswald is cut out of the photo. It is a white spot where Oswald, like the whole outline of his body is. It's all just white. A lot of people believe that it was Roscoe White that did whatever and, edited those photographs. But Jim Gokenauer, he passed on, rest in peace. He was interviewed by the church committee about some of the information related to the assassination because he had met and interviewed the main Secret Service agent. His name is Boyd, last name Boyd, I think. But this guy talked about having this conversation with Jim, and opened up this file on the assassination when they were discussing certain things. You'd have to listen to his interviews because I don't want to butcher his story. But he talked about a transparent or slide sheet of an Oswald photograph in his file thing that he had. And when Jim went to go look through it and pull out and see what it is, the guy shut the file and pushed the photo back in there and then shut the file in a safe. And then that was the end of the conversation. He ended up walking out with Jim. Like I said, I don't want to butcher his story, but he testified that to the church committee. The church committee never published his documents. You can find where his name's mentioned. They mentioned James Gokenauer. And he's mentioned throughout certain instances of the church committee report when they interviewed that agent. They asked him if he showed any photos to a Jim Gokenauer. The guy denied everything. And that's what Jim told me that he said he'd do if he was ever talking to anybody about the conversation that they had. He said he would deny it all. So look, you got to put weight in stuff like that, especially with certain witnesses. And now, do we have people that can corroborate Jack or Roscoe White's story? Not just his son, but do we have people that interviewed researchers? Do we have anybody who bothered to give him the time? I've seen an editorial magazine about Ricky White coming forward about his dad having belongings, but what does that separate from fucking Woody Harrelson talking about his dad being on the knoll? You know what I mean? Like, do we have any more witnesses and evidence?
Well, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think clearly it was Roscoe's job, as the last memo written in December of '63 said. Stay in the background. Okay, don't do anything to draw attention to yourself. Roscoe was a pretty secretive guy in the remaining, I think it was 6 or 7 years that he lived. But Barry, I did want to ask you a question. And the question was, do you know exactly when in '71 Ricky found the canister? Like what month?
I don't know the exact month. It was actually he and his sister. It was his family. They were going through their daddy's things after he died. And I may have missed that. By the way, you gave me an opening. I really want to give credit here to these researchers. I'm sure you're familiar, Tim, with Gary Shaw, Gary Shaw, and Brian Edwards. They wrote a book. It just came out this year. It's called Admitted Assassin, and it's in conjunction with Ricky White. Phenomenal book, loaded with information. All those documents that I just mentioned, the 3 cables, the confession, they're all in the book, in addition to a bunch of other documents that they have. Another source is by Gary Cartwright, who is, I don't believe he's still alive, but he kind of started all this in 1990. He wrote a story in Texas Monthly called, quote, "I Was Mandarin." And of course, it's this story about Roscoe. And then the third one, which is not directly about this, but it indirectly relates to it because of the words, Roscoe White's own words in his confession, is the book by Mary Haverstick, and it's about Z.R. Rifle and how on November 22nd, a pilot, was waiting at Redbird Airfield for someone that was supposed to meet her. And of course, if you go by his confession, he says that he failed to transport subject to Redbird, realized what a mistake I had made. And Jerry Cobb, or June Cobb, whatever her name is, QJ Wynn, the main.
It's June Cobb.
It's June Cobb. Okay. She went by QJ Wynn. That was her code name for ZR Rifle. She ended up having to take that plane off without that person, because according to Mandarin, or according to Roscoe White, he failed to transport the subject to Redbird. That's another corroboration. Robbie, you asked about witnesses who can corroborate the story. Geneva White testified. Now, this is a wife, so this wouldn't count in court, but she did testify that Roscoe left the house in the morning wearing his civilian clothes, but he was carrying his uniform on a hanger. So, and then Bobby Hargis, if you remember, he was the Dallas Police Department a motorcycle cop who got sprayed with all the blood in the brains. He actually parked his bike, ran across up Grassy Knoll, up across Elm, up the Grassy Knoll, and got to behind the picket fence where he encountered, quote, Roscoe White. And he was in his Dallas police uniform. And according to Bobby Hargis, Roscoe White told him, quote, "I'm looking for the shooter like everybody else." And Bobby Hargis left him because this is one of his partners. and he returned to his bike, and you can see it on the Zapruder, the film footage as he goes back down, picks up his bike, and starts. Beverly Oliver said that she saw, quote, Geneva's husband. She didn't identify him as Roscoe White. She identified him as Geneva's husband without a hat and a gun belt walking down the steps from the picket fence. Now, you say, well, how did Beverly know Geneva's husband? Beverly knew Geneva because she worked at the Colony Club, which was right across the street from the Carousel Club. So she became friends with Geneva because they worked across the street from each other. And of course, then you have Roscoe White's own confession, which in 4 different places, he says Mandarin, that's his code name, as identified by the cables, was behind the stockade fence. The target was open. He fired. It was a definite hit. He says it was a 7.675 Mauser, our gun. All right. And Mandarin kills K. And then he identifies the exact spot with the black dot and the red box. And all of that is corroborated by Ed Hoffman and Lee Bowers. So there's more corroboration for Roscoe White's story than you look at all these other people that have claimed to be grassy knoll shooters. Some of them didn't claim witnesses. Like, for example, Lucien Sarti, the French assassin. He never said he did it, but Christian David did. E. Howard Hunt did. If you look at E. Howard Hunt's deathbed confession, he wrote French assassin on the grassy knoll. But they only have witnesses. The Chicago hitman, James Files, confessed himself, but there's no witnesses. LBJ hitman Malcolm Wallace, according to Billy Celestis and Cliff Carter, he was the guy that was shooting behind the grassy knoll, but he never confessed to that. But in Roscoe White's case, there's 3 witnesses that place him behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll. There's 4 confessions from himself, and the story, as he confessed, is corroborated by Hoffman and Bowers.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting back to the question I asked originally, Barry, the reason I asked that question is something else interesting happened in 71, specifically July of 71. And that is that Malcolm Wallace, who I believe was in the sniper's nest, whose fingerprint was found in the sniper's nest. July of 71, Malcolm Wallace is driving in the middle of nowhere, Texas, bright sunny day, no moisture, no ice on the road, 1 car accident, quote unquote, no autopsy. How interesting.
That's the same month, that's the same year that this guy died, Roscoe. He was fatally burnt, in 71. He's working at M&M Equipment Company, and he had just told his wife, he said he had a religious conversion, and he had just told his wife he wanted out of this business. He had even told his pastor. There's a pastor, I'll get a Reverend Shaw, who corroborates the story, who they were going through marriage counseling, and he had said on several occasions he wants to get out of this business. And he said basically that I'm signing my own death warrant by doing this, because he goes from an asset to a liability overnight. So that, sure enough, September 71, he's in an explosion, an acetylene torch or whatever, some kind of torch.
Acetylene
torch flamed up. There was a can of chemicals nearby. It was stored under his workbench. It explodes. It burns him over 90% of his body. On his deathbed, the Reverend Shaw shows up to hold his hand, and he tells him this was no mistake. I saw who did it, but I forgive him.
Wait, the acetylene tank blew up?
The acetylene torch flamed up, and there was a can of chemicals underneath his workbench which blew up because the torch flamed up, and he didn't know that the can of chemicals was underneath his workbench.
Hold on a second. You have to have something spark to alight acetylene torch. So unless he left it running, you have to have something.
Well, he said
spark.
there was a leak. There was a leak in the acetylene torch, and when he flamed it up, I guess he turned it on. There was a leak. Somebody had sabotaged the torch, or I don't know how those torches work, but there was a leak. And when it leaked out, it combined with a can of chemicals, it exploded, it burned him over 90% of his body. But the important thing is he tells Reverend Shaw, I saw who did it, but I forgive him. And in his dying confession to Reverend Shaw, this is like the third time he said this to Reverend Shaw. I murdered people, foreign and domestic.
Okay, so the acetylene thing. I have to get clarification on this.
Oh, you're asking the wrong guy, Robbie.
I know, but it is impossible to those things to accidentally like ignite. You have to turn two nozzles
He did.
at separate.
That was his job. He
Okay,
turned it,
so
he turned it on,
so he
but
turned
it had
it on.
a leak.
Oh, and then it had a leak, and then okay.
It had a leak, and then
because even with that, like, I mean, you can knock one of those tanks over. That's how I almost died, but you don't get it. It takes a lot for those things to like really actually. It has to be purposeful, or you'd be using it. Did he smoke cigarettes while he's like everyone in Dallas smoked? I mean, if he smoked cigarettes, it would match all the cigarettes they found behind the picket fence. But was he smoking and doing an acetylene torch? People smoked and pumped their gas. That's not a stupid question.
No, you're right.
People do that. People do that. But according to witnesses, he was just doing his regular job. And so that involved the acetylene torch. And then there was a leak in it, and the leak is what caused all the problem.
Yeah, if that was an accident on Genghis Khan, stop it.
But Tim, isn't it amazing that it's the same year that Malcolm Wallace dies, like you mentioned? It's the same year.
Yeah, they were all the conspirators were now expendable and had to be shut up.
So why you mentioned it earlier, Tim, but why do you think media hasn't picked it up if they bothered to report on the James Files story, the Harrelson story, all these claims that came later?
It's because they're doing the same thing the Warren Commission did. The only testimony that they took and put in evidence was anybody who corroborated what they had already been given as the preconceived conclusion about Oswald being a lone shooter. Anybody who offered any testimony that differed from that rhetoric was either not listened to, cast aside as being an idiot, or eliminated. One of three things happened to anybody who disagreed with the Warren Commission testimony.
Now, through all this interesting connections, you can kind of start piecing through. When do you guys try and draw connections when it comes to foreknowledge of the assassination? Obviously, we know about 5 or 6 different people that had foreknowledge of some type of plot going down against Kennedy near a certain, almost exact date. I'm curious if you guys have ever tried to, like the Richard Case Nagel part. I don't know if you guys, just from interest, I'm already thinking about trying to piece through some of the witness testimonies like I did earlier with Eddie Barker and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of, like, did Richard Case Nagel have a knowledge on it? I don't necessarily need to believe Nagel, but there's a lot of things that weren't followed up because of there's weird ones too. Like, I forgot what the guy's name is. Like I said, there's 5 or 6 people. I know people know about Richard Case Nagel as being one. But there's one guy, make sure I can find his name real quick because it is kind of interesting. It's probably the weirdest foreknowledge of an assassination. David Conrad Glass had 6 dreams. And in this dream, a woman came to him and said Marilyn Monroe would die of suicide within this. And he said it 2 months before it happened. He said it the day after, the date he had from his dream was the day after Marilyn Monroe did it. So he said like November 5th as an example, and then she died November 4th. And a guy was able to confirm he said that months before. Then he said JFK will die on the 21st of November. He saw it in his dream, and it fucking happened on the 23rd or whatever. So it's like you start thinking about like, okay, well, what's going on? So I'm wondering if you guys ever had to piece, because there's a lot of things that get chalked up to fringe and tossed out.
Well, let's go back to Nostradamus. Okay, let's go back to Nostradamus. 1500s. In the new lands of America, 3 brothers now shall come to power. 2 alone are born to rule, but all must die before their hour. 1500s, 3 brothers. Very interesting. So when you talk about people that seem to have some kind of prescient knowledge of something that's going to happen. And Robbie, you know my story. The first time I saw LBJ as an 11-year-old kid, I didn't know from Adam's House Cat. I saw a picture of him taking the oath of office. And I grew up in an Irish Catholic Democrat political family, right? First time I saw a picture of Johnson, I said to my mother, I don't trust that man. After she picked her jaw up off the floor, she said, why? And I said, because he's evil. And boy, there's a prescient statement from an 11-year-old kid who didn't know shit from Shinola at the time.
Yeah, but you could tell by looks. Like when I see LBJ, the Wu Tang song goes off in my head. That Wu Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with, you know. Like, I mean, obviously he's a very imposing figure.
Here's some names for you, Robbie. Do you know who Rose Jeremy was?
Yeah, the girl that allegedly. Well,
Okay, well, you know what happened to her.
Yeah.
Okay, she had foreknowledge, allegedly.
Yep.
David Fury had foreknowledge. What happened to him?
Yep. Yep.
Obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald had foreknowledge. What happened to him?
Dr. Mary.
Richard Case Nagel had foreknowledge. What happened to him? And then how about Geneva White, Roscoe's wife? She found out by accident. She overheard her husband talking to Jack Ruby. And the only reason she stopped at the door to listen is because her husband had recently had an affair with a woman named Hazel. And she caught him in the act. And it almost split their marriage up. So Rock promised that the affair was over. And Geneva gave him a second chance. But one night when Ruby was over, and because they were friends, they had him over to dinner all the time. So Ruby comes over for dinner, and she happens to walk by and hear Ruby mention Hazel's name. And so she stops, and she listens, she eavesdrops, and Ruby's telling Roscoe, quote, Hazel is the contact. And then she continued to listen, and Ruby said something about the Bay of Pigs and how Kennedy had betrayed them. And the longer she listened, the clearer it became to her anyway, that her husband and Ruby were talking about killing the president. And the night before the assassination, by the way, she got in trouble for that. Ruby found out that she had overheard him and got really upset and threatened to kill their two children, Tony and Ricky. And Roscoe intervened on her behalf and suggested an alternative, that she undergo a series of shock treatments to eliminate her memory. And indeed, in 1964, Geneva went through 4 separate sets of shock therapy. The final treatment was in 75. So she paid a price for that. The night before the assassination, this is according to Geneva. This is a direct quote. This is in the Gary Carpenter article, if I got his name right. Neither of us slept very well the night before the assassination. He kept tossing and turning, and finally I asked him how he could go through with it. He said, honey, it's like war. The president is a national security threat. If I don't do it, we'll be in a nuclear war very soon. She said, well, he's got 2 kids, just like you. And Roscoe replied, honey, matters were taken out of our hands a long time ago. Then he turned over and pretended to be sleeping, and I started to cry. The next morning, she said, Roscoe looked like a whipped dog when he went to work that morning. He didn't touch his breakfast. I was bathing the kids when I heard on the TV that Kennedy had been shot. Then they said that a policeman had been shot, and I thought, oh, God, it's Rock. But then he came home around 7, just like always. I put the kids to bed about 9 and made a pot of coffee. We sat in the kitchen. We talked for a long time. He said, honey, I never dreamed it would come to this. And then that Sunday, so this is the day that Ruby kills Oswald, she said Sunday was Ricky's 3rd birthday, so on Saturday I baked a coconut cake and got the party favors ready. That night, Saturday night, Ruby came over for supper. We sent the kids outside to play with Ruby's dog. What was her name? Sheba or something like this. That's her direct quote. Rock cooked steaks on the grill, and I made baked potatoes and a salad and a strawberry shortcake because that was Rock's favorite. After dinner, I was washing the dishes, and I heard them talking in the living room. Ruby was bragging about killing Kennedy, flying high like he was drunk, only he wasn't drinking. He talked about killing Oswald the next day and said it wasn't going to be any problem because he gets signal when they were going to move him. And then he said something about how one of them had left a bullet at Parkland. The next day, after Oswald was killed, according to Ricky, the son, Roscoe came home, ran into the house, and instructed everybody to pack up. We're leaving. and the family then disappeared. And he said over the next 6 years, they moved all over the place. They lived in New Orleans. They lived in Mountain Home, Arkansas. Dad had basically dead end jobs. They just moved around, moved around. And then when they came back to Dallas, the Reverend Jack Shaw interacts with them at this point, or intersects with their life. And he says at this point, the family appeared to have money. He says they had a new car, they had a new home. Roscoe White pledged $10,000 to our building program. And this is a guy who had just been working at a post office and a five and dime store, according to Ricky. The kids, both boys, had new bikes and go-karts. The family purchased a cabin on a lake in central Texas. And he said during this time, Roscoe continued to mess around with other women, and he was counseling the couple. He prayed with them on several occasions. And he said Roscoe poured his heart out to me. He said he told me he had sinned against God, his country, and especially his wife. He told me he had taken human life on foreign soil and here at home. And I didn't press him on the details. He said, but that's what he told me. And then he told that to me again on his deathbed. So I just gave you 5 names of people who had foreknowledge, and all 5 of them, 4 of them ended up dead. Geneva didn't die, but she had to go through shock treatments to erase her memory.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy to imagine where Roscoe got the money from. He's running all over the world, killing people on contracts, right? Nobody's ever going to see an exchange of anything other than money, and that wouldn't be able to be traced. So
before he died, Jim, right before he died, Geneva was in New Orleans, and she had just gone through a nervous breakdown and had been hospitalized for about a month. And according to Reverend Shaw, who visited her there, a strange man approached Geneva and told her, quote, "We have another job for Rock. Tell him he has 48 hours to get in touch." So that goes to your point that he was a contract killer that had many jobs. This was just one of them. And that's why when he told Reverend Shaw, "I've killed a lot of people, foreign and domestic," it's because he actually had.
What can you explain the connection with Jack Ruby? Like, where did he meet Jack Ruby, or where did this association start?
You know what I mean? I don't know the answer to that question. I know, I mean, obviously he hired Geneva to work at one of his clubs, but I'm thinking that the relationship predated that and that Geneva got the job as a result of that relationship. I don't know when that relationship started.
Because there's a few Dallas police officers that met like girls and would talk to Ruby about getting them to work at Ruby's club. So I was wondering if it was something association, either Dallas police wise or something that he got in the time span before the assassination. I don't know. I mean, you mentioned multiple instances.
It's got to be more than just employer, employee, or I got hired because I had a connection, because they're having him over for dinner like he's a friend.
Well, they call it Texas hospitality.
Yeah. Yeah. But that friend, when he found out Geneva had overheard him, wanted to kill her 2 kids. So with
Ruby
friends like
wanted
that, yeah, I just read it too.
That doesn't sound right. Ruby loved
found
children.
out. Well, he threatened to kill Tony and Ricky because Geneva had overheard them talking about killing Kennedy. And that's when Roscoe intervened on behalf of his wife and said, well, let's don't kill her. Let's put her through these shock therapy treatments, and that'll wipe her memory clean and you won't have to worry about it. So she ended up going through those 4 shock therapy treatments. But that's because Ruby found out she knew. So she was a loose end. And everybody else in this case who was a loose end dies.
See, I believe Ruby was a little bit more innocent than a lot of people say. Not in the sense of innocent in the assassination case, but a little bit more of a nicer person than a lot of people have described as him being a brutal, organized crime figure. I have a clip up of the guy who was getting informant information from Ruby, and as he's documented in the HSCA and Warren Commissions as Ruby was an informant. He gave me information on the Chicago mob outfit. He said he pissed off a syndicate person that ended up causing him to come to Dallas, which would match Ruby was in Chicago. And that's how a lot of people that were interviewed from the Warren Commission were explaining about Ruby during 1959 and before, about Ruby's prior history. I don't think he was a high organized crime figure. I think he probably was picked up by a Dallas police officer to do the shooting. The issue I have with the Roscoe White thing so far is if you're telling me evidence is missing out of DPD, and we're looking at Roscoe White as being the person responsible for that, then I can't say the DPD are just incompetent because they fucking can't find any of their damn evidence. Now it's like, wait a minute, someone was stealing their shit.
It's not DPD, Robbie. It's not. That's just cover. That's the same thing. Oswald had cover jobs. When he went to New Orleans, he worked at the coffee company. It didn't mean the coffee company was involved. That's his cover job. When he went to Texas, he worked at Texas.
Yeah, but Roscoe White couldn't have been behind the lineups where they put a fucking unfair lineup for Oswald.
No, he was. DPD was just cover. That was his cover job, work inside, and they're going to have somebody in uniform behind the picket fence, and no one's going to be suspicious of a guy in uniform. But you got to have a guy in uniform. You got to have your guy. So they needed somebody inside DPD so he could have the uniform and the badge so that no one would suspect that him being the assassin.
Do we know, did Roscoe White ever talk about being in the basement of the Dallas Police headquarters?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because there's about like maybe 7 different reserve officers and other officers that were in the basement that talked about encountering an unidentified police officer. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of police officers. Maybe you don't know everybody's name, but for every single person, one, including when 10 to 15 different officers got orders on the 3rd floor or the 5th floor to rush down to the basement and clear it of guns before and do a search of it before the Oswald transfer was going to happen. They got down there and some unidentified officer had already told them the basement's already been searched. You're good. And then they got new orders and they were posted on either Commerce Street or Main Street. Now, the issue is a lot of people think like that's pretty suspicious. You're removing guns from a situation. It's like, well, they're about to have 100-something reporters in the basement. If anybody was going to grab a gun and shoot Oswald just out of pure anger, they didn't want that occurrence to happen. The issue with doing that is that they couldn't shoot Jack Ruby. When it happened, they had to tackle him with, like, it's why it's weird that all these guys are just jumping on top of Ruby. It's because they had no guns on them.
Yeah. Well, Robbie, I want to touch on something you said about the quote unquote benevolence of Ruby, because I believe also, he was very ingrained with the mob. I think, in fact, the mob is the one who ordered him to kill Oswald. But number one, he and Oswald were friends, and there have been numerous people and witnesses who would attest to that. So they knew each other. Okay.
All right. To brief on that, though, a lot of the witnesses I bet that you're going to be referencing probably worked at the Carousel Club.
No. People had seen them out together, et cetera, et cetera. Whether they were Carousel Club or not, I can't tell.
The main rumor that comes from is from one person. I have done over 500 clips on officers and witnesses. It literally all comes from one guy. It's actually technically 2 people. And the one guy that I'm mentioning is the master of ceremonies who I wish I could remember his name, but everyone has denied his claim. And then the guy who reported on it and wrote an article about it was for the Chicago Daily News, who wasn't even there at the basement. He just heard that information and posted the story. So I don't think Ruby and Oswald knew each other.
All right. Well, so that one aside then. Here's the next thing. Ruby called somebody on the Dallas Police Force the night before. This is fact. And the guy, he was warning this guy that there was going to be an assassination on Oswald the next morning. And it was in the works. It was going to happen. Okay.
Now, hold on. That is true. That's very true. But who are you mentioning? Because there's Billy Grammer, who later came out and said. So Billy Grammer later said Ruby, that he identified Ruby as the voice that called.
Yes.
But also that claim is different than the other claim, which was about 100 people were going to come and kill Oswald. So
I never even heard that.
The issue with that death threat, which it definitely I think is real, but it's hard to define if it was multiple people because the DPD talked about receiving multiple threats, but it sounded like they were reading off a script. which I wonder, since it came at different hours, was it the same person calling multiple people? That actually is why not I don't know if it's Fritz or if it's oh God, what's his name? Somebody from the DPD head chief guy, I don't know if it was Decker or not, Fritz or Decker, had said we need to move Oswald now. And but the issue is everything had to go through Curry, and Curry magically took his phone off the fucking hook. Which look, you work all day, you're dealing with this horse shit from all the I get it. I'm not going to blame the guy for just as soon as he gets home just being like I ain't answering that damn phone. But the issue with that is that they refuse to do anything without Curry's order. So probably when they should have moved Oswald, they should have, but they had to keep him there until Curry said it was okay and his phone was back on the hook. So
Well, let me just say then one more thing about the shooting itself. If I'm going to kill somebody, I'm going for the head of the heart. I'm not going to shoot him in the stomach. I think Ruby intended to wound Oswald so he could then go back to his fellow mafioso, and then he would be off the hook with the people at the mafia who ordered him to kill Oswald. He could say, guys, I tried. I failed. Oh, don't be me. And he'd be, quote unquote, off the hook.
but the most effective shot would be a headshot, right? We all agree it's a headshot. But then Tippett shot 3 times in the stomach or in the chest area or in the body, and then 1 shot in the head.
Yeah. Well, but it's a shot in the head that did it.
Surprisingly, more people aim for the chest. That's why they have bulletproof vests rather than fucking bulletproof face masks.
Exactly.
So I don't know about necessarily wounding Oswald. I definitely think Ruby was hired to do that duty. I don't think he did it on his own volition.
Correct.
There's claims, like I said, KRLD TV was sitting outside Commerce Street right in front of the police basement. They talked about a guy who fits exactly Ruby's description, and they even identified it was Ruby, came up twice to their vehicle and asked, has it happened yet, or is Oswald being transferred? They asked about the time. He even helped them unload some camera equipment, apparently. So there's that. There's Vaughn's statement that Ruby never came down the thing. There's Tom Howard, Ruby's lawyer or friend or whoever, in Dallas police basement 5 minutes and 10 minutes before Oswald was being transferred. He literally looked through the window and goes, is the transfer about to happen? And officer's like, yeah, that's from his testimony. And then he goes, all right, that's all I needed to see. And then went right out. So there's a lot of things where it's like, how did Ruby get in the basement? Was he let in the side door? That's a big issue. I don't know if he knew Oswald is my point. I don't think, maybe he definitely heard of him. He's aware of him. I just don't think there was a friendly association there because it does not match what the actual, like if you read through testimony of other people, not what the Warren Commission painted him to be, it does not match Oswald. Oswald's a lot of things. I think a lot of people were using his name, certain people that look alikes, and there's 3 people that were arrested before Oswald was, that fit and almost look identical to him. But I've done a big thing of trying to go in here. I honestly believe Oswald went to the theater with his gun because he liked to carry a gun around because he thought it was cool, much like the picture with the thing like that. Johnny Calvin Brewer his whole testimony changes later, obviously, like most people's do. But he didn't positively identify as this guy acting suspicious. He literally states in his testimony and in his oral history that this man left my store and walked to the theater. Well, that's not somebody running from the fucking cops and going into a theater. There's a lot of things. Nick McDonald lied when they arrested him. Charles T. Walker, in his testimony, stated when we pulled Oswald out of the theater, the crowd assumed he was the killer of the president. We were arresting him on a cop. The issue with that is he's sitting there screaming police brutality and he's doing all these things. Well, everyone goes, he's hyping it up for the media to make himself look innocent. Well, no, because Charles T. Walker stated that on the ride to the police headquarters, Oswald was saying, what are you guys arresting me for? It's not illegal to carry a gun. You're telling me a cop was killed? He's questioning and doing all this. He's already shouting his innocence on the way there in a police car. Why wouldn't he just wait till he got to the headquarters? No, he did it at the headquarters too. So it honestly seems like he was set up in a way for sure. But I'm really trying to verify, I think we need to identify what his personality is. And a lot of it would not be associating with Ruby at his club. All the strippers, all the carousel girls said that Ruby and Oswald was never there. They all said that the lights were too bright anyway. You wouldn't be able to tell. So Bill DeMar is the master of ceremonies. He's the original statement where all that rumor spread from. It went to Larry Crawford, which went to a couple officers, which ended up going to some reporters, and then it ended up hitting and getting published somewhere. But I don't think there was an association. Sorry, I just from what I've seen.
Well, I also, in my its opinion, I think Oswald. Nobody's asked why did he go to the Texas Theater. It wasn't to see the movie, or he would have paid for a ticket. Okay, he went. He knew something was up. I think the light bulb had finally gone off. I've been set up. I'm a patsy. He was either going there to lay low for a while or to meet his handler, one of the two.
I get that. There's weight. I mean, there's weight to that too. If you look at the half a ticket or half a box top he had in his pocket, where
Well, he kept going around and
Yeah.
sitting next to different people.
that's from a couple witnesses
But
that stated that.
yeah, I mean, he was acting real suspicious. He kept going up. He didn't know his contact clearly, so he kept going up, sitting next. The theater was completely empty. Nobody sits next to somebody in an empty theater. He leaves seats between you, but he kept doing it. He did it 3 different times, and then
Ah,
after he
look, man, people go up to someone in the middle urinal instead of choosing the one all the way to the left or right sometimes. That guy's weird. We
three
don't
different
associate
times.
them. Come on.
Yeah.
You know that happens. You know that happens.
I don't know, man. That sounds weird. I was going to say something about Robbie doesn't believe that Ruby and Oswald knew each other. Well, there's a bunch of witnesses that say otherwise, and I know you don't like Judith Very. You don't give her much time of day. Judith Very says Ruby visited the lab, and Lee Harvey Oswald introduced him to her as Jack Rubenstein, my friend Jack Rubenstein. That's how she met Jack Ruby for the first time. There are multiple witnesses that saw the two of them together at Carlos Marcello's 500 Club. He came to New Orleans several times to showgirls Carlos Marcello. When he was there, Oswald was there, and they ate together. Witnesses saw the two of them together in Florida at Key West Airport when they were going to Cuba to spring Santos Traficante from Castro's jail. They flew there together. And then the night before the assassination, at 2:30 a.m., they were both seen eating together, and the waitress who waited on them at the B&B Cafe swore that next day that the two of them were sitting at the same booth because she waited on them. And of course, multiple witnesses said either they were waitresses or they were guests, saw them together at the carousel, Ruby and Oswald together. A cab driver, Raymond Cummings, claimed in March 67, 4 years, he was talking to Jim Garrison at this time, that he had taken Oswald and David Ferry together to Jack Ruby's nightclub, and Jack Ruby came out and opened the door for him and took him in.
Okay,
This is Raymond Cummings.
just to let you know that if that was that, Ruby did that for people he didn't know either.
Well, that could be true too, but the way he spoke to him was like that they were old
He
pals.
did that with everyone, though. He even printed up club passes for people he had just met. There's a couple people at the Adolphus Hotel that got press passes from Ruby. He was just friendly because he was trying to promote his business.
Yeah, he worked it. He did work it, especially at the Adolphus right across the street. He'd hand out business cards.
One thing you mentioned, though, and it's what I mentioned earlier about like with Tom Howard and then Ruby being seen out front of the police headquarters. I agree. I think Oswald was stalking, or not Oswald. Ruby was stalking Oswald. But the Warren Commission did investigate some of these claims. Now there is testimony they never followed up on, but is testimony they have taken. But I don't remember if it's Decker or if it's another agent that had information. There's very few people that knew when Oswald was really going to be transferred. Okay. Billy Grammer mentions it. He mentions it when he was talking to Ruby, having coffee with him or something like that, and realized that this was the guy he was talking to on the phone that gave the death threat. He had discussed when Oswald was going to be transferred with Ruby. That is one account. There's another account from a woman at a diner saying that this officer, I can't remember his name. I'll try and post the clip in the comments. But she stated that this guy was talking to another officer and stated that Oswald was going to be transferred at 10 o'clock. And she thought she saw Ruby there. So there's a lot of things where it's like, where did Ruby get the information? He had to have an inside information, or he might have picked it up. There was a lot of things that weren't pursued by the Warren Commission, clearly, and just kind of got dropped off. But we got to somehow return back to Roscoe White here. At any moment, was Roscoe White involved in any other significant events besides Dealey Plaza, 10th Street. Was he near the theater? Was he near anything? Was he searching? Did he make a statement? Is there any other evidence that wasn't in that locker that his son found? I mean, we got to get to a wrapping point on here, but I want to see if there's anything left.
I don't have anything, Barry. You may. I haven't been able to tie him to any other, event with the enormity of the ones he's already associated with.
Robbie, he had two jobs, and this is by his own confession. The first job was to be the shooter behind the stockade fence. He accomplished that job. The second job, he was supposed to transport a subject to Redbird, and he failed to transport that subject to Redbird and realized, according to his own words, what a mistake he had made. Those are the two jobs that he had. The killing of Officer Tippett at 10th and Patton that was one of the things that was referred to in the cables that I read to you. If you look at the December cable, stay within the department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do of the mix-up. The mix-up was the killing of Tippett. That was not in the plans. He himself indicated that was he said, quote, something was wrong. I was forced to take him out. That was the mix-up. And the December cable that he's getting from his intelligence people says, quote, the men will be in to cover all the misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned in the department. Wait for further orders. So he had two jobs. One he did successfully. One he failed at, getting the subject to Redbird. And then the third thing that he did was because of an unforeseen, I don't know what the mistake was. I don't know what, I think probably Tippett knew. I think Tim's right. Tim mentioned earlier, he was the only guy in this whole scenario. It wasn't CIA, and he knew. And so he was a loose end. And so at that point, Roscoe just falls back on his training and takes out the loose end. And then he gets a cable 1 month, less than a month later, saying, don't worry about it. We got men coming to cover all of this mix-up. That was the mix-up. And it really helps put into, if you choose to believe the Roscoe White story, which I think there's more evidence that is true than any other story about a grassy knoll shooter, it explains everything. And it shows how everyone was moved prior to the assassination. Oswald was given a cover job at the Texas School Book Depository. Roscoe was given a job at the Dallas Police. Even QJ Wynn, June Cobb, moved to Bell Helicopter in the months before the assassination, which was right outside Dallas. Even Ruth and Michael Payne worked for Bell Helicopter. Michael did. And this was the CIA front. So everyone's getting moved. And this is after the September cable, which says, hey, we chose Dallas. Dallas is the location. All of a sudden in October, everybody starts moving to Dallas. And then it helps explain, how Tippett got killed. That's been the $1 million question forever. But Roscoe White answers it, if you believe the confession.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about Roscoe White here, and a lot more probably about Ruby than I thought we were. But let's get you guys to promote your links here, and I'll make sure I can link your links in the description. I always appreciate the chats. Thank you for doing another one of these, guys. It's very beneficial for people that are new to the case and just want a good summarization of some things. But Barry, let's have you promote your links, and Tim will have you promote yours.
My link is www.sphistory.com.
And the link to our website is www.thejfkassassination.com.
And if you need my links, well, you're already here, so you made it. Good job. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank, and stay tuned for our next episode.